Recorded. All right. Welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to see you. My name is Frances Kramer. I'm the Director of Education at Pendle Hill. And I am delighted to be with you tonight with Cherice Bock, discussing Friends and Sabbath in the time of climate change. These are several themes that get at the core of what we're doing at Pendle Hill, both the question of environmental sustainability and the creation of sacred time and rest. And so I am so grateful that we get to learn tonight from Cherice. Cherice edits Illuminate, the Friends Bible Study curriculum of Barclay Press. Since 2019, she has completed quarterly Bible studies on 30 books of the Bible. Cherice also teaches Bible and eco-theology to undergraduates and seminary students. A Quaker from Oregon, Bock is a recorded minister and a member of North Valley Friends and Sierra Cascades Yearly Meeting of Friends. She co-edited the book Quakers, Creation, Care, and Sustainability with Stephen Pothoff and speaks and writes about and advocates for faith-based climate justice. I am grateful for the friend who requested live transcription, closed captioning, which has now been enabled, that you should be able to view by clicking on the bottom of your screen to see the live subtitles. And Cherice mentioned that she's going to be sharing with us a screen share of a PowerPoint presentation. We are going to keep, so I'm watching the questions coming in the chat as well. We are going to keep the spotlight on Cherice only, rather than removing it entirely, but because for the recording, we want to avoid recording friends without their consent. But if you click at the top right of your screen where it says view, you can switch to gallery view, even though Cherice and I will be spotlit. And then again, another technical note, Cherice will be screen sharing. You should be able to adjust the size of Cherice's screen share by hovering your mouse over the edge of the screen share and dragging it to make bigger or smaller the size of the screen. If you're having trouble with this or with any other technical questions, you can text me and I'll be happy to answer those privately in the chat. I'm going to invite us now all. I'm not sure if you're hearing my dogs in the background, but they are also excited to have to be listening to Cherice. And I'm going to invite all of us into leading worship to prepare ourselves for Cherice's message. And Cherice will speak out of the silence. Thank you, friends.
Good evening, friends. It's good to be with you all and to be able to share this Zoom space with you. And I'm coming to you from Oregon out on the West Coast, and I am on Kalapuya land and really aware of that fact as we talk about Sabbath and climate change and friends' responsibility as we consider how to move forward in addressing climate change and the rhythms and spiritual practices that we inhabit in these next years and decades. So I'm out here in Oregon. I'm part of a pastoral friends meeting and teach and lead people of faith in relation to climate issues. And so my work, my academic and my activist and advocacy work is at the intersection of religion and climate justice. And so considering what friends, what people of faith can offer to the climate movement is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. And so I really wanted to offer these thoughts on the Sabbath and the relationship to climate change as something that I do think that people of faith can offer to the climate movement and to the overall transition towards a more just and sustainable future. And so as we consider our role in climate change as it stands now and the direction that we want it to go, I hope that you'll kind of receive this as something to meditate on and take action as you are led. And so I'm going to begin sharing my screen here in a second and start with I can get it to share the proper thing here. Okay, so start with this fourth commandment from Exodus. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. So a couple things here to mention. Slaves in that time period were more like indentured servants who were enslaved until they paid off a debt. So a little different from maybe concept of slavery we have now, but just so you don't get caught up on that word. And when it's talking about alien resident, it just means people from other countries, people from other faith traditions who are residing among them. So remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. It's one of the 10 commandments. And it's one that friends have practiced in the past, but maybe isn't a focus these days in some friends' traditions. Maybe it is in yours and maybe not. Or maybe other traditions that you're part of practice this. But the Sabbath is a day of the week set aside to rest, to worship together, and to spend time doing something other than work. And it's supposed to be something that allows us to be released from the need for labor. And it's something that Jews practice from sunset on Friday to sunset on Saturday, and Christians have been practicing a similar thing to Sabbath on Sunday, worship day to be more restful on Sundays. So that's kind of the general idea of what Sabbath is. But I wonder what connotations come to your mind. And actually, I should have mentioned this to Francis. Can we actually open up the chat so people can respond in the chat and see each other's responses? Sorry, I didn't think about that when we were talking before, but take this moment.
The chat should now be open.
Okay. Take this moment to consider what comes to mind when you hear the term Sabbath. So put in the chat one positive and one negative connotation that comes to mind about this word as you think about what the Sabbath is. rest, wonderful renewing, limiting, no commute, restriction, hard to pull it off, when not everybody else practices it. Honoring it for real is a challenge, not measuring up to your own hope of how you'll practice it. Passivity, I think, is seen as somebody saying that's a negative, and rest. Peacefulness, not having all the same responsibilities we have during the rest of the week. Resting in love, especially God's love. Feeling like you should be doing something at all times. Yeah, so that's a hard thing to overcome when you're trying to practice the Sabbath. Opportunity for slowing down, feeling light, worship, recreation, letting go of anxiety. Repression. Thank you for sharing those words that come to mind and those reflections, both positive and negative. I feel like there are a lot of ways that this idea of Sabbath has great things about it, but then the way it's been used in our own culture and in a lot of culture has been, like you're saying, really repressive, restrictive, has to do with a lot of rules and trying to get us to feel a certain way about, maybe we feel anxious, we're not getting other things done. And we maybe feel anxious, we don't have time to do all the things that we want to do in the work week. But it also has these really positive connotations of just giving ourselves permission to rest and be at peace and just be and have a time of renewal and getting ready for the next work week and everything else that goes into our normal everyday lives. So sometimes we can think of this in legalistic ways and say you have to practice it in this way. So I think that's where a lot of the negative connotations come in, but it is supposed to be something that releases us to be able to practice rest. So I suspect that many of us have kind of experienced those drawbacks and those benefits in any times that we have kind of waded into experiencing the Sabbath. So tonight I'm going to talk about these 4 topics generally, with a lot more specifics as we go. But I'm suggesting in this lecture that we think of the Sabbath more holistically than just kind of our own individual practices, our own individual rest. We think of it more holistically and communally, including the rest of the community of all life on this planet getting to participate in that Sabbath, and consider what it means for us in this time of anthropogenic climate change. So what does the practice of Sabbath teach us about the economy, how we organize goods and services? What does the Sabbath teach us about society, who has value and how we determine worth? What would society look like if it released each person to have access to days off with enough income on the other days that they don't have to work every day? And how does the Sabbath relate to the environment and how we interact with the land, animals, plants, and other parts of our global community? So we'll ponder these questions and consider what it looks like to attempt to practice the Sabbath in our spiritual communities today, considering in what ways we're challenged to learn, grow, and change our ways of living as the Spirit speaks to us through our Sabbath practice. So first, I'll give a little bit of background on the Friends' perspectives, especially early Friends' perspectives on the practice of the Sabbath. And then I'll consider some of the ways the Sabbath has been enforced in ways that cause harm and reinforce class privileges. I'll then discuss some of the intentions of what the Sabbath is supposed to be about and how it's explained in the Bible. And then I'll consider how this relates to the situation of climate change that we're experiencing and some of the ways in which Sabbath practices can contribute to a more just and sustainable society in the future. So first we'll talk about friends and the Sabbath. And so we've got William Penn here and a map of the very grid-like systematized city of Philadelphia. Maybe many of you are near there if you're close to Pendle Hill. Too bad we aren't all there getting to experience that retreat center together, but we can imagine ourselves there together. So many friends were quite strict about enforcing the Sabbath. And when William Penn set up his new colony, the Pennsylvania Assembly adopted his body of laws, which included a required Sabbath day on Sunday, the Lord's Day, the first day, as early friends called it, on which people were not supposed to work. And they were supposed to instead attend worship and or spend time studying the Bible. They weren't supposed to do anything diverting or playing games or other forms of recreation. These were considered vices, not only on the Sabbath, but also on other days, but particularly on the Sabbath. This was so that friends and others could make sure to stay focused on God all the time instead of getting distracted by all these other forms of entertainment and other things that they're doing with their mind and body that keep them away from being able to pay attention to God. And so laws enforcing Sabbath observance were pretty common in the early colonies here in what's now the United States. And so they weren't limited to Quakers, but a lot of the other colonies and then the states had what's called blue laws that were relating to what you could purchase on the Sabbath, the hours that businesses could or couldn't be open, and the types of businesses that weren't allowed to be open on Sundays. And these blue laws were on the books well into the 20th century, and some of them are even still in place in some places, in some states and counties around the country that still have particular restrictions on Sunday about when you can and cannot buy alcohol, for example, or which kinds of alcohol you can buy, and restrictions about horse racing and purchasing cars on the Sabbath. And for many friends in the United States in the 18th century, keeping the Sabbath was really important. And people could be read out of meeting for not keeping it properly. So kind of in that part of Quaker quietism, there was a time where it was really important to make sure that friends were practicing the Sabbath correctly. And this was an important thing to decide who was in and who was out of the group of Quakers in the 18th century as well as the 17th. So that's one perspective on the Sabbath that a lot of friends experienced. Robert Barclay had a little bit of a different perspective, and so he wrote his apology, the kind of Quaker foundational theology, book of theology, and he thought that no day is more holy than another day, since, of course, that was a reason why friends didn't practice holidays and, gave the days of the week as first day, second day, etc., to not elevate different days and to not worship those gods that they're named after and stuff. So they were pretty particular about, no day is holier than another. You can find God on any day. You don't have to practice a sacrament at a certain time or on a holy day for it to be something that can connect you to God, those sorts of things. So Sabbath became sort of part of that idea for Robert Barclay. And so he talked about that we didn't, it's not important to decide whether to practice Sabbath on the seventh day as the Jews do or the first day as Christians do. He didn't think it was important which day we take a day of rest, but but that we do need a day to meet together, but it doesn't really matter which day. So he said in Proposition 11, he said, we do not feel morally obligated by the fourth commandment or otherwise to keep the first day of the week any more than any other day, or that there is any holiness inherent in it. However, it is necessary for some particular time to be set apart for the faithful to meet together and wait upon God. It's also fitting for them to be freed from their outward affairs at certain times. Both reason and equity recognize the right and privilege of servants and even beasts to have a time of ease allowed them from their continual labor. So it doesn't really matter. We don't have to have a day that is particularly set aside, but we do need a day that we decide to meet together, and we need to give people and animals a day off from their labor so that they're not required to work every day. So basically we should have a Sabbath, but we shouldn't restrict it to a certain day or set up a bunch of rules about it, was Robert Barclay's perspective. So I think in the formation of the United States, there was a bit of a clash between different values that impacted Sabbath practices. First, there's the Protestant work ethic that we've maybe heard a lot about if we grew up in the United States, that, work hard and get ahead and you'll kind of be rewarded for that hard work, right, by your sweat equity. So there's that piece of it, the Protestant work ethic that teaches us we're only valuable when we're producing something. And this fits in pretty well with the system of capitalism the economic system that we use in this country. And second, there's a strong strain of legislating morality as people moved here to escape religious persecution and set up societies based on their own beliefs, and persecuted people who didn't follow their particular sect's beliefs and practices. So these two practices, these two perspectives and values among early colonists were kind of different ways of thinking about Sabbath practices, that you're supposed to be really legalistic about this and follow the Sabbath as our group says you should, but also how are we supposed to practice a Sabbath where we're resting when we're supposed to have this great work ethic and we're only valuable when we're producing something. So those two kind of different values played out in early American society in interesting ways that I think still impact the way that we view work and our understanding of ourselves and our own value when we take time to rest. So in my own experience in my family, I have family history of friends, at least for several generations. And so I know that my grandparents growing up in evangelical Friends contexts in the United States in the 1940s were taught to follow the Sabbath pretty strictly. And this was tied to a lot of pretty strict rules about what they could and couldn't do, like no card playing and no alcohol and other things along those lines, no dancing, all those types of things were kind of rolled into this idea of a fairly strict observance of practices like the Sabbath. But things kind of loosened as far as all of those types of rules over the last several decades. And when I was growing up, I remember that in the 1980s, a lot of people would have Sunday dinner after worship, and they'd maybe put a pot roast in the oven before worship and hold a big midday meal with their family, and then a smaller quiet meal in the evening. My grandparents, I remember them telling me they didn't want to make other people work on the Sabbath. And so that was particularly important, so that they're releasing other people to not have to work on the Sabbath too. But by the 1990s, we usually went out to eat for Sunday lunch with my grandparents. And I'm not certain if this was a change in their values and beliefs about the Sabbath, or simply a factor of them aging and the expansion of their understanding and practice of women's rights. And my grandma's, kind of mutinying and not wanting to put on a big midday meal every Sunday and have to clean it all up. Because even in their relatively egalitarian friends' marriages, it was my grandma's doing the cooking and cleaning most of the time, though they both also had jobs outside the home. The shift in Sabbath practice to eating out made it possible for my grandmas to get a rest day, but it also caused other people to have to work on Sundays. So there's a kind of difference in the way that they're thinking about equity and what it means to rest. Nevertheless, these lunches with my grandparents were really important to me in feeling loved and connected to my extended family. And we had time to sit around the table and share stories about our lives and get to know each other really well through those meals. As an adult, it's been challenging to figure out how to practice the Sabbath in ways that are not overly restrictive or legalistic, and they're liberating for everyone involved. But honor the intention behind the Sabbath, and in a society in which communal practice of a day of rest is no longer present. when my kids were young, we would do a candle night once a week, usually on Saturday night, where we would only use candles and lanterns for light after the sun went down, in a nod to Jewish Sabbath practices. We canned our own grape juice, and we would each have a glass of grape juice and munch on fresh fruit and veggies that were in season, or during the winter have local fruit we had canned. We'd play games, read books, tell stories, or play and sing music together, which probably aren't what the early friends would have told us to do, but they were good ways of connecting as a family. As my kids got older and have different activities and things they want to do, we kind of got out of the habit of that practice. And so it's been a little bit challenging to figure out, how do we do a Sabbath practice as a family in this part of our lives? So I would appreciate it if you would take a moment to put in a few words in the chat about your experience of Sabbath practices among friends or in the tradition that you're connected to. What are a couple of words about Sabbath practices that you have been engaged in over the years? Maybe you don't really have a Sabbath practice other than going to worship, meeting for worship. Maybe you have a more traditional Sabbath practice that you have participated in with your family or community. So put a few words in the chat about your experience practicing Sabbath.
I'll invite friends to make sure you're addressing everyone in meeting and not just the tech host, so that everyone can see your responses to this question.
Afternoon naps. Yeah, that's a good one that kids probably need, but parents really appreciate. Neighborhood walk. Lighting candles. Avoiding shopping or working for pay. Waffles for breakfast. Yeah, it's good to have a consistent meal that you kind of think of as your Sabbath meal. Worship, meeting with family, reading the New York Times, no major physical work or business transactions, church, then a family meal. During the pandemic, the family couldn't visit, but before and after the pandemic, you would visit each other. Yeah, the pandemic has been a sort of Sabbath in a way on its own, but kind of disrupts the other Sabbath practices we might usually do. Reading and being quiet, a tea night with candles, Sunday school, church, family time. Sabbath moments daily. Yeah, that's a good idea. Go shopping on Sundays in the past, meandering drives, never mowing the lawn on Sunday. Yeah, maybe those things that feel like a chore, you kind of maybe want to avoid on Sabbath. Not dancing, no card playing from the grandparent perspective, naps and walks, midday dinners, comics, yeah, when we had the physical newspaper. Church and dinner. One day a week as a day of rest and renewal. They would hide the irons in Northfield. Okay, that's interesting. So that you couldn't iron anything. You couldn't do the chores on Sunday, I guess. Yeah, unplugging entirely for the day. Yeah, now that we're in kind of a technological age, that's a really good way to practice Sabbath, is leaving your phone somewhere that you won't look at it during the day. Maybe not doing other things on technology. Visiting and connecting with people, gardening. Not allowed to do homework. That's a good practice. Then you don't end up leaving it till the last minute and you can enjoy your Sunday. That's great. A day away from screens. Yeah. Not spending money, spending time reading, intentional conversation. Great. thank you for sharing all of those. Sounds like people have a range of experiences, and some similar ones and some that are maybe newer practices, and some of them that are kind of hearkening back to, we used to do this, but maybe that's not so much happening anymore. So thank you for sharing those. That gives us a good sense of where each other are at and the different types of practices that we're used to. So these practices can be really good and healing and renewing, right? But they can also be kind of restricting, as we talked about. And so sometimes the enforcement of how we're supposed to practice the Sabbath can become really harmful and problematic, because we get questions of, who gets to decide what is the correct Sabbath practice, who gets to enforce it, what does that look like when things are enforced, what does enforcement look like, what are the what are the punishments, right? And it can be really legalistic, where we get kind of hung up on, are we doing it right, rather than just enjoying the day and being able to rest. So these laws can easily be used to keep certain types of people in their place, right? People that are already don't have as much power in society at a given moment. For specifically for women, for people of minority races and ethnicities, or those who are considered deviants by those in power, and so they can kind of create Sabbath laws, especially if they're laws of the state or the nation that are enforced on people who are considered deviant from the rest of society. And punishing people for following the Sabbath is pretty much the opposite of the point of Sabbath, right? So we can get hung up on, this is what Sabbath is supposed to be, and forget about the heart behind it, that Sabbath is made for humankind, not humankind for the Sabbath. So as a society, we've been stripping away these blue laws, these Sabbath laws, over the last century or so, and not forcing people to practice a Christian day of rest, which is good, because it's kind of unconstitutional, right, to enforce a certain type of religious practice, and the practice as Christians see it, as opposed to the Sabbath day for Jews, or the worship day for Muslims on Friday. So that can be a problem constitutionally. And this is in many ways in line with what Jesus did, right? Removing some of the legalism around the Sabbath and trying to get to the heart of what it's supposed to be about. But in our case, with the removal of these laws comes increased pressure to work or do other activities on the weekends, right? Because we don't have this collective rhythm of work and rest in the United States, and rest in our society is not valued. We're taught that our value comes from our productivity. So like I mentioned before, with the Protestant work ethic, that's considered a moral value. It can be hard for people in the United States to value ourselves and others if we're not producing anything, and if we're not doing something useful or productive with our time. I find that people can even get into this state of like meditation and exercise and stuff like that are also, we think of them as productive, right? We're doing something to make ourselves healthy, and to do something good for our bodies and our minds and our spirits, which is good, but it can still be kind of wrapped up in that productivity mindset if we're not careful. So those of us with the ability to take at least one day off each week often have a hard time letting ourselves rest and just be and take an actual Sabbath day. And in our current society, the ability to take a Sabbath is often a privilege. Honestly, it's difficult for both my spouse and I to take a full day off at the same time, and also support our kids financially, and also support them throughout the week by getting them to and from their various activities and connections with friends and families. And my husband and I, since we had kids, have taken turns, kind of having part-time jobs that are flexible, or several, part-time or contract work jobs, so that we can have flexibility and take care of our kids. But it also means there's a lot of pressure to find enough hours in the day to get our work done. So in this society, we've made it really necessary to, most cases, have two adults working outside the home for families, and need at least two incomes in order to pay for housing, food, clothing, and maybe even we need a side hustle or extra part-time job to afford any extras for a lot of people. So being able to take a weekly Sabbath in our society is a matter of privilege because we don't require people to pay workers a living wage, and we don't support each other's mental and physical health through benefits. Many workers have to have several jobs in order to afford the basic cost of living. Accessing social services or food, housing, and other necessities is looked down upon, and people are made to feel ashamed because they can't take care of themselves. So our whole system is set up in a way that we're supposed to take care of ourselves and do work that's productive all the time. And if we aren't able to do that, we should feel shame, is what our society tells us, and we shouldn't allow ourselves. We don't have the value, we don't have the worth to be able to take a rest. We aren't able to rest if we aren't in a high-paying enough job. So this sets up a society in which each of us must be afraid and anxious at all times that we'll not have enough. We might lose our jobs, then we wouldn't have health insurance if we're lucky enough to have a job with benefits, and we would lose our ability to acquire food and shelter. If we have extra money, we need to put it into our retirement or other savings funds, because if we're doing fine financially today, no one is going to make sure that we have enough for retirement or in the next recession. We have to constantly fear not having enough. So taking a full day off each week can provoke anxiety for those who have a lower economic status. Even for those on a higher economic level, it's difficult to draw the line and be assured that one does indeed have enough to put their enough aside to plan for unknown and unexpected future situations. In a society with so few safety structures and which shames those who can't take care of themselves, those with the ability to practice a regular Sabbath must be fairly privileged, and they're part of they're part of a community that helps one another feel a combination of pressure, kind of peer pressure in a positive way, hopefully, and support to practice this weekly day of rest, supporting each other to be able to make it through financially in order to make sure that we can all practice a day of rest together. So consider for a moment and put in the chat, if you would like to, what holds you back from practicing the Sabbath fully or more fully? And when you do take a day off, how do you feel? Do you ever feel anxious that you're not producing something, or find yourself before you take the day off feeling anxiety about all the things you're not going to get done, things like that? So what holds you back, and how do you feel? Does any of this kind of resonate with you? Put a few words in the chat about that. Taking a day off is getting something done, yes. So you can maybe check that off your list and feel like you've produced something. You've produced a rest day. So that could still be part of that mindset. Yeah, there's a lot to get done on the weekends when we have the rest of the work week tiring us out and all the things on our list to get done. So it's hard. Weather. Yeah, so depending on the weather, you might have certain things you need to do during that break in the weather or whatever. Or if you're heading into winter and you need to get things ready or that sort of thing. When you don't have other commitments, it feels like you can take a Sabbath. Yeah, when you're in a ministry job, Sunday is an intense work day, so you have to make sure you pick a different day to take a Sabbath. Yeah, so being able to prepare food in advance makes it possible to take a Sabbath day, and so it can hold you back if you don't have the capacity for whatever reason to be able to store food that you've made in advance or have time to make it. Work extra hard before your Sabbath, and then on the day after. So maybe it feels kind of like a lot of work to take a rest. Yeah. People that are not valued by society, people with disabilities, and maybe elders that are kind of pushed aside by society have a hard time being seen as valuable, and so maybe that impacts your ways of feeling like you can take Sabbath if you're in one of those groups. Yeah, you have to schedule religious obligations on Sunday, maybe, or even Saturday, whatever day you think of as Sabbath. Prepping for work on the next day, especially if you're a teacher. Yeah, having patterns of behavior of things that you kind of do daily, such as entertainment, or patterns that kind of maybe daily things that keep you from being able to just rest. Worship group in your home that I'm not sure if you're saying that helps you take a Sabbath, or it gives you something you have to plan on a day that would otherwise be Sabbath, but could go either way with that. In retirement, feeling a little more like you can take Sabbath, but I have to work at it. Yeah. Lack of community makes it hard to take Sabbath. Torn between catching up on some of the things you need to do around the house and garden, and knowing that it's important to rest. Not having a clear idea of what Sabbath actually is, how do we practice it in our own time? So yeah, how is it different from a personal day where we just kind of take a vacation day from work? So, yeah, those are good thoughts. And so I think the fact that we don't have a communal practice as Quakers, as Christians, of how to really practice the Sabbath well here, at least in the United States, can make it challenging, and particularly with the societal pressures that make us feel anxious about all the things that we're not getting done and not being valuable because we're not productive. Those things can hold us back and make us feel anxious and not be able to just let go and enjoy that rest day. So, so this brings us to the part about Sabbath in the Bible and the kind of community that is set forward. And so, so as we kind of turn the corner here and relate this to the Bible and climate change, and consider how to set up some Sabbath practices that might be in line with what the Bible suggests, as well as helping us deal with climate change, I think this productivity mindset that we have as Americans, this valuing only if we're productive, is something that is completely opposite of what we see in the Bible about who's valuable and why. And so kind of getting into this biblical mindset of what the Sabbath is supposed to be about can really help us. I don't know, some of you as friends may not be people for whom getting into a biblical mindset is always very encouraging, but I encourage you to, at least for the next amount of time that we have together, to kind of at least learn and reflect from the practices that are put forward in the Bible. I really think of it as, I don't know if you've heard the term traditional ecological knowledge, but that's something that ecologists and social scientists have kind of identified in Indigenous cultures, that there is ecological knowledge within the cultural practices and stories of Indigenous communities. And so if we think of the ancient Hebrews as an Indigenous community who were practicing something that was fairly sustainable for the land and the society and the other animals and plant life in their region, we can learn in that space from their traditional ecological knowledge and look at how, the type of society that they are trying to set up, and meditate on how that might look in our own society in our own time. So in the Bible, the Sabbath is set up as a rhythm around which to create an equitable and sustainable community. So it's really the heart of what keeps the society, the Hebrew society, moving and kind of on this cycle of these rhythms of Sabbath each week, each 7 years, and each 7 times 7th year. And it sets up a community and relationship with the land that is aimed toward equity, even if we don't quite understand it that way today when we read exactly what the laws were. The goal was to set up a society where everyone is taken care of. And so the instructions about Sabbath begin with creation. In the very first chapter of Genesis, we have this story of creation and the rhythms of the days, the evening and the morning, the first day, the evening and the morning, the second day, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good, right? And so this rhythm of creation and of life emerging forms, and then on the 7th day, God rests. And so God gives us this example of resting. You know, God doesn't have to rest, but God sets up the space for rest to be holy and important and something that we recognize as having value, and models that for us and releases all of us to be able to practice that and to recognize that each of us are valuable enough to deserve a rest. These rhythms of Sabbath were established for the 7th day, and then the 7th year, and the 7 times 7th year, which is called the year of Jubilee. And so the Sabbath is for the people, for all types of people. We read about in that first passage at the very beginning. I read from Exodus how it's for all the types of people, not just the people with wealth and land, but the people who are their servants, the people who are not part of their religious tradition, but are living in that land. It's also a time of rest for the animals. So the animals are given that day off as well. And there are a lot of instructions about, you can help your animal to, get out of a dangerous situation, and you can feed it and give it water, but you aren't supposed to work it on the Sabbath. So it's a day of rest for the people and the animals. And then the 7th year is a rest year for the land. And so the land is supposed to lay fallow, and you eat the produce, you eat whatever you've saved from the previous years, and you eat whatever volunteers on the land that year, but you don't plant things, you don't work the land. So in our own context, we often do crop rotations, and that's kind of a similar way to give the land a rest. But depending on the type of climate you're in and the type of soil and the type of things you're planting and that sort of thing, a different location might need a different rhythm of rest for the land. But the point is that the land gets a rest when it needs it. We don't just try to keep it productive. In our own culture, we use a lot of fertilizers to keep the land producing, even when it's pretty exhausted and we've used up all the nutrients in the soil. We try to replace the nutrients every year by fertilizing, and so we're not really giving the land a great amount of rest a lot of times in our culture. But in the Bible, it's trying to set up this rhythm of rest for the land and making sure that the land will stay healthy. It's also a focus on the social and the economic systems staying in balance. And so the year of Jubilee, the 7 times 7th year, the land is returned to the families that originally were the ones who were the caretakers of it. And so if you know from your Hebrew Bible, the 12 tribes divide up the land of Israel. God gives each of the tribes land. And so, you may sell a piece of land when you're having a hard economic time, but then it reverts to that family after the 7 times 7th year. And so this is a way of keeping wealth fairly equitable, and you can't really accumulate a lot of wealth and power because you can't acquire all of the land. So this is a pretty good way of making sure that the social and economic systems remain fairly stable across time. And so the land is returned, people's debts are forgiven. If they're indentured servants, they're done with their service at the end of that year. You can find a lot of this stuff about the rhythms of the Sabbath in Leviticus 25. So if you want to look at that later, that's a good place to start and kind of see it. And so then you have this rhythm of these social and economic systems being kind of stabilized. And the social system, when you're a slave, sort of, their idea of slavery, of indentured servitude, you become free on this year of Jubilee. And to some extent, every 7 years, there are different types of contracts. So some of them are the 7-year one, and some of them are the year of Jubilee ones. But this idea of, everybody is kind of reset to their level, their social level and their economic level, and it keeps the community more stable. So you've got this kind of balance of social, economic, and ecological systems, making sure that everybody's taken care of. The law also says that if you're not practicing the law appropriately, the land will vomit you out. And so if the land is showing you that it's kind of rejecting you and you're not able to live on the land anymore because you've used up all the nutrients, you've dried up all the water, you've polluted things, then the land vomits you out and you aren't able to live there anymore. So that you're not in step with the covenant between God and the people and the land. If the land is rejecting you, if the land is pushing you out because you're not taking care of it appropriately. So this balance with the land, the social and the economic systems is really important in the Bible. So the purpose of the Sabbath, the reasons that people practice the Sabbath aren't just to have, a day where you have to follow certain laws, but the goal is that you're trusting God. You're trusting that you'll have enough, even if you take this day off. You're trusting that you are valuable enough to deserve rest, and everyone else is too. You're expressing gratitude to God for having enough and having food and water and everything that you need. You're sharing with the people around you when you share a meal together with your family. And you're resting. And it's also, like I said, in this broader 7 years and 7 times 7th year, making sure that you have social safety, that your community is a place where everybody has what they need. So this Sabbath is kind of this central rhythm for building up a Shalom community. So Shalom is the Hebrew word for holistic peace. And it's, I think it's fairly similar to what we're thinking about when we consider the term sustainability, that we've got the social, the environmental, and the economic systems in balance, where it's bearable to live there, it's equitable for all people and other species, and it's viable. You can continue living there forever. So you've got this regular reset button for redistributing wealth and power in the community and making sure that everything stays sustainable. So that's the ideal. Whether people actually practice this may be a different question, but the ideal, the purpose of Shalom, the purpose of or Sabbath, the purpose of living in this rhythm of community is to set up this Shalom community where you have the balance of all these systems. So in the New Testament, Jesus gives his mission statement when he stands up and speaks in the synagogue in Luke 4, and he talks about proclaiming good news for the poor, release of captives, recovery of sight for the blind, and proclaiming the year of the Lord's favor is a lot of times how it's translated in English, but it means the year of Jubilee. So he's proclaiming that year of Jubilee, that 7 times 7th year, where all the debts are forgiven and everything is brought back into balance. And everybody, is socially, economically, and ecologically equitable. And so this year of the Lord's, year of Jubilee is what Jesus's message of good news is about. He said that Sabbath is made for humankind. So when he got criticized for not quite following the exact letter of the law on Sabbath. He reminded us that the Sabbath is for us. It's not for restricting us, it's for our good, for our benefit. And so it's lawful, he said, to save life on the Sabbath. It's lawful to heal and to release from bondage. So there's one passage where he uses that specific phrase, to release from bondage. So this idea of liberation on the Sabbath is really important part of the Sabbath. And Christians shifted it to worshiping on the first day, I think partially because they were probably still participating in the Sabbath with going to synagogue with their Jewish community at the beginning, and then as history went on, they kind of separated from the Jewish community. Then they only worshipped on the first day, on Sunday, because that's the day that Jesus resurrected, and so that was kind of the day that they met to celebrate each week. So for friends and others, I think that the central reasons that we should practice the Sabbath are still present. It's important to have a day set aside to rest and to worship and to be in community. But the friend's point that no day is holier than any other day is still true. And Jesus, reminded us that it's not a day that needs to be completely different from other days. We still do the work of healing and liberation and encouraging life. But we do set aside a day that, okay, this is the day we're going to gather, we're going to worship, we're going to intentionally rest. So moving on to Sabbath practices for the time of climate change. I think it's important for us to recognize that Sabbath is connected really strongly to Jesus' understanding of good news. It should be good news, right? It's not something that should be like, oh, we have to just let go of every joy in life on the Sabbath. It's dull and boring. It's the worst day of the week or whatever. But it's good news. It's something life-giving and liberating. We're able to be liberated by this practice of Sabbath. Walter Brueggemann has a great little book called Sabbath as Resistance, and I think that book is really helpful in understanding the liberation aspects of Sabbath, and how the Sabbath is something that is resistance to the cultural norms of our culture that tell us that we don't have time to rest, we aren't valuable enough to rest, all those kinds of things that our culture tries to tell us. But Sabbath helps us resist all of those cultural concepts and to be able to rest in God and trust and all those other things that I mentioned before. Sabbath is for restructuring our society and restoring the health and the balance of our community, including the ecological community, and reconciling ourselves with God and other people and other species and the land. Sabbath is liberating. It releases us to be able to be our full selves and be healthier. It's intentional, so we need to practice it with intentionality. There's a lot that goes into getting ready to practice Sabbath, and some of you mentioned that it takes a lot of work to get ready to practice Sabbath. But in our case, as we think about the Sabbath intentionally, that we can take intentions that maybe even if we can't practice Sabbath on the same day every week, we can intentionally choose a day each week, maybe a different day, Tuesday this week and Thursday next week or whatever. Or we can create rhythms and practices that give us a purpose of Sabbath for ourselves and an intention, and maybe a mini rest that we can practice, that maybe we can't do a full 24 hours, or we can't always do it on the same day, but we can practice it in some way. So it's communal, and this is important. I think we get kind of caught up on this idea of like myself practicing Sabbath for my own rest, but it's supposed to be practiced in community, and you can't really practice it by yourself. And so all those things I talked about that are the liberating aspects and the kind of redistribution of wealth and making sure that you have this kind of social and economic equity, those can't happen by ourselves, right? We can't do those pieces alone. So we need to practice it with a community. And for climate reasons, attending to seasons and limits can be really important. So practicing this rhythm of Sabbaths can help us pay attention to the rhythm of the seasons around us, the limits of what the land around us can produce, and how we live within those limits in a way that's life-giving, and we still have enough. Everybody has enough. So just a reminder of the things I said that are the purpose of the Sabbath. So kind of getting ourselves back to that of trusting God that we are enough, we'll have enough, we're valuable, expressing gratitude and sharing with one another, resting and providing each other social safety. Some of the ideas that I am suggesting here for ways that we can practice Sabbath that lead toward positive climate results, maybe a little bit. You can personally take mini rests, like I said, maybe like an hour each day or 15 minutes a day even, to intentionally give yourself some space to rest. Or you can rest from a certain thing once a week. So you maybe take a day where you don't use fossil fuels for transportation or heat or whatever. Maybe you don't eat meat on the Sabbath, or you don't use plastic, or at least single-use plastic. Maybe you don't use screens. Some of you mentioned that idea of taking a day to kind of unplug. And so this takes some intentional planning. You can intentionally plan meals from local food. So this takes some work beforehand, right? To think about, okay, what am I going to eat on the Sabbath that's from a place locally, and make sure that you have everything that you need for eating something from a local farm or business, preparing that ahead of time. Preparing ahead of time is really important so that everybody gets a rest, right? So that it's not just the people who are eating the food or whatever you're doing, but everybody gets to rest, which maybe you can make something that doesn't need to be refrigerated or cooked, so that you can just have it available to take with you for a picnic or something, but preparing that ahead. Making a commitment with a community, either your friends and family or a spiritual community, of how you're going to practice Sabbath can be really important, so that you don't feel like you're alone in this. It's a lot easier to feel, to remember to do it, first of all, and to feel encouraged to keep doing this even when it gets hard, if you're doing it with other people. And so maybe your meeting or church or other spiritual community or small group, or at least your extended family or friend group, could make a commitment to try to practice Sabbath together in one of these ways. And then intentionally planning longer term to think about Sabbath years and years of Jubilee. What would it look like for your meeting or congregation to think of a 7th year Sabbath, where you kind of let things lie fallow and you don't feel the need to produce that year, and setting that up so that people maybe take turns, in the academic world, and ministers sometimes have a sabbatical year every 7th year, but even then it's sometimes expected that you're producing something during that time, right? Like academics are supposed to write a book during that time a lot of times, or work on class preparation for the next year. But giving each other an actual sabbatical year, or planning for how to do that as a community. And years of Jubilee, what if churches, the church worldwide practiced a year of Jubilee? That's that kind of reset of social economic systems, and bringing into that space our climate debt and the ways that we use resources. So as we think about the amount of resources we use, and how currently we're using about 1.5 planets worth of materials each year, that the planet only produces 1 year's worth, but we use about 1.5, from the things that have been stored up in the past. And so that's running out, right? So if we practice more of a rest year and give the land a rest to allow itself to recover from the overuse that we've put it under, that would be a way for us to really contribute. And then, like I said, we can't really do this by ourselves. So a lot of this needs to be communal action that is that is with other people. Maybe that's other people of faith. Maybe it is people who are not people of faith, but you want to work with them to set up a society that reflects more of these Sabbath values of equitable economic system and social system, and also taking care of the land. And so this could be working on legislation to make sure that these policies are liberative to others in the land and other species, that allow everyone the time to rest and think about the intrinsic value that others have and that we have, that we deserve rest. We all deserve rest intrinsically. We don't have to earn it with working hard enough or being the right kind of person that has the right kind of job that allows us to earn enough. But so specific policy ideas could be raising the minimum wage, encouraging local food systems so you don't have to transport food from far away, holding shared meals for your extended community so that everybody has a space to come together and eat and rest from having to produce a meal and pay for it and all that. Advocating for and practicing debt cancellation and wealth redistribution. So redistributing the land perhaps to Indigenous people who the land was stolen from, and recognizing that people who were enslaved, people of African descent who were brought here, didn't always get access to land and other forms of wealth. So figuring out how to practice that kind of wealth redistribution. Reducing pollution, which also has racial justice overtones in our country and around the world. So by reducing pollution, we're helping make sure that people are experiencing equitable health outcomes, as well as, of course, encouraging more healthy ecosystems. Advocating for equitable access to healthcare. So this is a huge thing that as we are in this moment of climate change, that not everybody has access to be able to recover from, heat waves like we're having in Oregon this last week and elsewhere a couple weeks ago, and floods and other things that impact our health, as well as pollution. So all these types of things are shifting our mindset to a mindset of enough rather than more. So at what point do I have enough, and being able to rest in that? And the Sabbath reminds us that the seventh day every week, or 1 out of 7 days every week, we practice knowing that we have enough, that we are enough, and that we can trust God that we are enough. We will have enough. We will be taken care of. And this requires us to be able to trust our communities. So to be able to trust that we will have enough means we have to set up systems that care for one another in our communities. So advocating for and setting up those kind of social systems in our society is a way that we can practice these Sabbath ideas and release people to be able to practice a Sabbath when they would like to. So I'm not saying we need to legislate Sabbath again and make blue laws and make everything shut down 1 day a week. But and actually, I worked at a friend's camp a while back that had some Seventh-day Adventists on the kitchen staff. So that was really convenient because they didn't mind working on Sunday morning and they'd take Saturday off to go to worship. And so, it can be helpful to have different days that different people take off for a Sabbath. But so I don't think we need to legislate Sabbath, but we do need to legislate the possibility for everyone to take a day of rest if they would like, and in the ways that feel meaningful to them, and allow them to rest and experience being valuable and deserving to rest. So that's the end of the slideshow. And so just to sum up, I would say that as we're considering Sabbath as a way to help us get into the practice of addressing climate change issues, the mindset change, the shift from always needing more and more to that mindset of enough is really important. recognizing that not everyone has the privilege to practice Sabbath because of the way our systems are set up, that realigning those systems to be more equitable is a way to practice Sabbath and to liberate others to practice Sabbath. And that includes other species and the land. And so as we consider more equitable systems and how to enact those in our society, remembering that the land and the other species with whom we share this planet are part of that community of life that we're encouraged to make sure is taken care of and is part of that balanced Shalom community that we're trying to build together in our faith communities. So I will leave it at that. Thank you for listening and for sharing your thoughts in the chat, and I look forward to your questions.
Cherice, thank you so much. That was really beautiful. I've been looking forward to this. I personally find the Sabbath to be one of the great sustaining joys of my life, and I'm always excited to learn more about how other people bring it into their lives, and to think specifically for Pendle Hill as a community that's devoted to these themes that you identified as the themes of the Sabbath, of learning and studying and worshiping in community. Pendle Hill, I think, seeks to be a place of Sabbath in this moment when I think a lot of us have found it even more difficult as work has come into our homes and as our lives are more and more involved in the virtual world. It becomes increasingly difficult to kind of unplug, and we're always looking for new ways for Pendle Hill to facilitate that. So I know I've learned a lot. I do want to open this up for questions in the chat. The way that we usually do questions is to invite you to send the questions directly to me, and I will be watching them and kind of bringing them together, kind of amplifying some of the themes that I see popping up in the questions. But we did get a couple of questions come in while you were talking. One was a comment about Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, a very wise book that I think draws on a lot of the themes that you were mentioning. I'm curious if you want to elaborate on any connections you see between the wisdom in that book and the Sabbath.
Yeah, I think for those of us who live in the United States, that it's important to listen to Indigenous people from this land to find out, like, how is this land supposed to be cared for? How have people found it good to care for the land in your particular region, and to join those who are doing that already. So that can be a really good way to participate in a Sabbath restorative practice yourself with a community that knows how to take care of and give the land the rest and the rejuvenation that it needs. I think she also helps us to change our mindset from only thinking of the rest of the planet as resources, right? To seeing the rest of the community of life as relatives and other beings that are part of this journey with us. I've talked about this more in other places about how the new creation in the New Testament is really talking about that we participate with the other parts of creation, especially Romans 8 really talks about this, where it says all of creation is groaning with us as we have these labor pangs of birthing the new creation. So it's not just the people that are involved in this process of building kind of the kingdom of God or the beloved community, but all of creation is working with us to work towards that kind of vision of the new creation that God has put forth. And so when we think of all the other parts of the planet and the community of life as relatives, as partners in this work, rather than as sort of like below us, then that can really help us to shift our mindset from from always wanting to take and take and take to being grateful for the enough that we have. So Kimmer does a great job of helping us to kind of make that mindset shift too.
There's another question that came in as you were speaking about the role of singing and music traditionally and in your understanding. I wonder if you can talk a bit about the role of singing and music in Sabbath.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it probably depended on the particular meeting. I know that some meetings were more open to that than others, and so some meetings have always, or, I don't know about always, but there have always been some friends meetings that find music really meaningful and important in connecting. But then friends also did kind of reject music as something that kind of leads to emotionalism and like, is this really a spiritual experience, or is this you just kind of having this emotional response? And so I think there were different perspectives from friends as far as whether that was an appropriate way to connect with God or whether it was sort of a unnecessary diversion and entertainment. So it probably depended on the person you asked.
That makes it kind of makes a lot of sense with the variety of observances that you mentioned as you started the presentation. This is an interesting question. The question is, what about working on ourselves, inner growth work on the Sabbath? Should the Sabbath be exclusively a time of rest, peace, quietism, celebration? If so, should we only challenge ourselves to spiritual personal growth and answering our convictions and shortcomings on other non-Sabbath days, carved out for retreat and fasting and reflection?
Yeah, I think this is the kind of question where it's like, it really depends on your personal ability to keep yourself from like trying to do this because you're trying to do something, or if it's like what you're actually really called to do in that moment, right? So if it's like, I'm just doing this because I want to, make progress and get a gold star for all the good work that I did on this day. If it's sort of like this, I've got to keep producing and keep, working in a certain way, that can still be kind of missing the point of the Sabbath. But if it is sort of like, I'm sitting here, I'm being contemplative, and this revelation about myself occurs to me, or, my spiritual growth deepens and expands on this day without, really trying to, I think that's fine. So I think it really is up to you and your work with God as far as what's healthy for you and what mindset you're bringing to it. I know in our culture we have, it is just relentless. Like every term that we have is based on money and productivity, right? Like you can hardly use a term about about any sort of work that you're doing without it relating to time and money. And so we've just placed so much value on producing that, that having a day set aside to not produce anything is so hard, and it's so countercultural that we want to work on ourselves, because that's good work. It's good, Sabbath work. But it's still in that mindset. I would need to do something. I need to work on this day. Otherwise, I'm not worth anything. I'm not doing the thing that gives me worth in this society. So I think it depends on yourself and the work before you and your particular leading. I think for ourselves, part of the, I guess, the work of the countercultural work of just not working for its climate impacts is really important too. Just that we can have land and resources that we're not using as resources, right? That we're not not everything has to be productive. Not everything has to be useful for human beings in this moment, in the sense of I'm using it for myself, as opposed to like, it is useful to have functional ecosystems for humanity. But not everything has to be like controlled and repurposed to, fit into human society and human needs in a particular way. So I think releasing ourselves and releasing the other parts of the world around us from having to be useful to us and controlled by us is the work of Sabbath, that we kind of let go of that control, let go of that need to plan and schedule. It takes a lot of planning and scheduling to get to that day of rest, but on that day, then we can just be and kind of work within ourselves on that, not working and still finding ourselves valuable in that time.
I really appreciate this question. What is the role of play as contrasted with either work or rest in the Sabbath? I suspect it may be similar to what you said before, that it depended on the community, but it's something I've been thinking about as well. In the Jewish Sabbath, I think the role of kind of joy, delight, and pleasure play a really big role. And I'm curious yet to hear you talk about the role of play and pleasure in the Sabbath.
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. And I think friends have traditionally not been really great with this. So I think early friends probably would have said no play and no pleasure on the Sabbath. But I don't know that was good. I don't know that was the right way to practice Sabbath. I think that being able to know that we deserve to have pleasure and be delighted and enjoy things and be playful. These are important kind of countercultural things. Again, they're not totally countercultural in that our society definitely tries to get us to play and be diverted and be entertained all the time. But that like really spontaneous and joyful sort of play that we can have when we don't have another agenda, I think is really beautiful and opens us up to awe and beauty and enjoyment and love and laughter and so many things that are really healing to ourselves and our relationships. So I think that play can be a really important part of the Sabbath, and especially if you're around kids, of course, this is really important and can really connect you to your kids and be a time that you don't have scheduled types of play. You don't have okay, we have to get here to soccer practice at this time to be able to play in a structured way, but just whatever bubbles up out of the moment and whatever brings joy to those who are there, I think that can be really good. I think on the other end of the spectrum, if we get too caught up and it has to be fun all the time and it has to be only positive feelings, that can kind of get to the point of like, that's not necessarily helpful either. So I think there would be a balance where, it's not all play, but it's not all just sitting still and being bored and miserable either. So I think it's a balance for who's present and the kind of situation that you're in that moment, and what your soul needs that day, what your community needs that day.
I'm so grateful for all the invitations that you've shared with us and just creating space to think about what might be possible to bring a little bit more of these Sabbath values into our lives. Is there anything that you would like to add in closing as we're nearing the end of our time?
Yeah, I think I would point out that a lot of the things that are kind of the bigger picture things are things that take a lot of work and planning and intention, not just on the Sabbath, but like throughout our lives, like to set up a society where everybody has the ability to practice the Sabbath. And so we can't just practice these types of Sabbath values on the Sabbath, but there are things that we we work on throughout the week to prepare for the Sabbath day and the Sabbath year and the year of Jubilee, and make sure that everybody in our society gets to practice that. So it's not just something where we only think about that on the Sabbath. We definitely have to prepare, it's like preparing the food, preparing the meals, as well as preparing the social setting that releases everyone to be able to rest and have that privilege be something available to everybody, and including other species and the land.
I so appreciate that, and I would add, I think it's also the reverse is true, that it is by observing the Sabbath and giving ourselves that chance to rest that we have the energy to do that work for the rest of the week as well. So it's this beautiful reciprocity. And I am so grateful for you spending the time with us. I'm going to invite us into a moment of silent worship to close. Thank you so much, friends.